After my daughter locked me inside my house to stop me from attending her wedding, I unleashed 20 years of silent rage and destroyed everything she built with her father. I used to think the worst thing that could happen to a woman was being betrayed by her husband. But I was wrong. The real nightmare is when the daughter you raised sacrificed everything for looks you in the eye and says you're the problem. That you, her mother, aren't good enough because you didn't give birth to a son. My name is Margaret. I gave up everything for my 2 daughters. My marriage, my youth, my pride. I traded them all for what I thought was a chance at a happy family. But to my husband's family, I was just the woman who failed to give them a male heir. And to him, I was nothing but an inconvenience. After the divorce, he vanished. Never called to check on the kids, never sent a dime. I worked day and night to raise our daughters on my own. And now, after everything, Emily, my eldest, is getting married, and she doesn't even want me at her engagement party. Not only that, she teamed up with her father and fiancé's family to officially uninvite me. "It's for the best, Mom," she said. "Please don't make this about you. Just sit this one out for my happiness. Can't you be as generous as Dad? Generous?" I laughed. I laughed because if I didn't, I would have screamed. This generous man was ready to sell both our daughters back when they were toddlers, just to settle his gambling debts. I was the one who packed our bags and ran in the middle of the night to save them. And now I'm the one who needs to be generous? That night, I withdrew every cent I had set aside for her wedding. The apartment I bought as a wedding gift? Gone. The savings for her honeymoon? Cancelled. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "All right then. From now on, consider yourself motherless. And if you want wedding gifts, go ask your father." The day before the engagement party, I received an unexpected invitation from Daniel's family, Emily's fiancé. They said it was just a casual dinner to relax before the big day. I had a feeling something was off, but I went anyway. Maybe, deep down, I still wanted to be part of my daughter's milestone. When I arrived, the atmosphere shifted immediately. Everyone at the table glanced at me like I didn't belong. Their smiles were tight, their eyes cold. Emily avoided eye contact. Her fiancé's mother, Mrs. Thompson, was seated at the head of the table like a queen. I said nothing. I just sat quietly and observed. After a few awkward minutes, Emily finally spoke. "Mom, this dinner was something we all agreed on. Please don't take it personally if we ask you not to attend the engagement party tomorrow. It's nothing against you. It's just for the sake of peace." I could see the guilt on her face, but not enough for her to actually defend me. Not enough to stop what was coming next. Mrs. Thompson suddenly slammed her hand on the table. "Why is this still being debated? If your daughter is marrying my son, she follows our rules. If you can't respect that, then she won't be welcomed into our family." I was stunned. Emily turned to me, eyes desperate. "Mom, it's just an engagement party. There won't be anything for you to do anyway. Please just don't come." I felt my chest tighten. This wasn't just exclusion, it was erasure. I had poured money and time into planning this event. And now they were acting like I didn't even exist. I asked, at the very least, don't I deserve a reason? You're saying I can't attend my own daughter's engagement and you can't even give me a why? Emily opened her mouth, but no words came out. That's when Mrs. Thompson stood up again, voice full of venom. "A woman like you, divorced, raising daughters alone, bringing bad energy, has no place at a ceremony meant to bless a new beginning. You'd only bring misfortune." My eyes flicked to Emily, hoping, begging for her to speak up, to defend me. Instead, she tugged on my sleeve under the table, signaling me to stay quiet. My own daughter, silencing me while strangers insulted me to my face. I yanked my arm away, stood up, and looked them all dead in the eye. "Misfortune? Since when did being divorced make someone cursed? Since when did having daughters make someone unworthy?" I paused, then added, voice shaking with fury, "I raised this girl alone. I sacrificed everything. I'm not selling her off. I'm giving her away. And if you think that means I deserve silence, then you're all out of your damn minds." Emily looked devastated, on the verge of tears, but I had no more sympathy left to give. That dinner triggered something in me, something raw, something I had buried for years just to keep functioning. After I got home, I couldn't sleep. The past came rushing back like a flood. I remembered the day I gave birth to my second daughter, Emily's little sister. My body was still weak, stitched and sore. And yet, my ex-husband's mother, my then mother-in-law, stood over me demanding that I hurry up and try again for a boy. She never saw me as a person, just a baby-making machine with a defective setting. There was this one day, burned into my memory, when half the family came over for lunch. I had barely recovered from childbirth, but she ordered me to cook for everyone while she lounged on the couch watching TV. And then, as if that wasn't enough, she turned off the air conditioning in the kitchen because it was a waste of electricity. I was drenched in sweat, cooking for people who didn't respect me. When I stepped out for air, she gave me a look of disgust and said, "Ugh, you reek of oil. Don't pollute the living room." That same afternoon, I finally finished preparing all the food, only to discover that the guests had already started eating without me. My daughters were sitting quietly in the corner, their plates empty. No one had offered them anything. And then, right in front of everyone, she yelled at me, "Margaret, why are you so slow? We've all eaten. Go wash the dishes now." The guests just smiled politely and complimented her for raising such an obedient daughter-in-law. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just stared at my husband, their father, who sat there eating silent, watching our girls go hungry, saying nothing. That was the moment something inside me snapped. I walked straight to the dining table, grabbed a bowl of food, and dumped it all over one of the guests. "Here, eat more. You seem to love it so much." Nobody stopped me. Maybe they were too shocked. Or maybe, for the first time, they saw the anger that had been boiling under my skin for years. That night, I packed what little we had, took my girls, and left. The morning of the engagement party, I got dressed anyway. I knew they didn't want me there. I knew Emily had made it clear. But some part of me still hoped that showing up, just showing up, would remind her that I existed. That I was still her mother. That I deserved to be seen. But when I tried to leave the house, the door wouldn't open. It was locked. From the outside, I jiggled the handle again and again, thinking maybe something was jammed. But no, someone had physically locked me in. I wasn't being asked to stay away. I was being forced. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Emily. "Mom, the ceremony is about to start. You probably won't make it in time, but I'll send you pictures. Don't worry, we didn't forget you." Didn't forget me? You literally locked me in my own home. I yanked the door until my hands turned red, pacing the living room like a caged animal. My neighbors were all at work, and no one would hear me yelling. Calling a locksmith would take hours, so I called the police. When the officers arrived, they were young, polite, and professional. One of them, a woman maybe in her mid-20s, listened as I explained everything. She looked at me, full of quiet sympathy, and said, "Ma'am, people like that don't deserve to call you their mother." She was the one who drove me to the hotel. She didn't have to, but she insisted. And as we pulled up to the venue, I could already feel the stares. A police cruiser arriving at a luxury hotel? Of course, people turned to look. A few guests were outside, laughing with champagne in hand, until they saw me step out of the squad car. The look on Mrs. Thompson's face, Emily's future mother-in-law, was priceless. She was at the entrance collecting envelopes. The moment she saw me, her whole expression collapsed. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. "Didn't we make it clear yesterday? Your daughter doesn't want you here." I smiled sweetly and glanced at the banner hanging over the doorway with Emily and Daniel's names on it. Then I stepped forward, grabbed the end of the banner, and ripped it down the middle. "Oh, I'm sorry," I said, holding the torn fabric. "I thought since my name didn't pay for this event, I wasn't allowed to touch anything." The music inside had just started playing. A video montage of Emily and Daniel's love story lit up the screen. I stood there, still holding the banner, wondering what came next. Then I heard her voice, loud and clear. "Dad taught me how to forgive. Mom taught me how to love. I'm lucky to have both of them." I froze. The room clapped. I stared at the screen, trying to process what I just heard. Emily, who had barred me from her own wedding, was now pretending I had taught her what love was? My fists clenched, my chest burned. This wasn't just betrayal, this was erasure wearing a mask of gratitude, and I was done playing nice. I didn't care about the shocked faces or the awkward silence. I didn't care about the video playing behind me, or the soft music fading into confusion. I walked straight into the ballroom. Emily's eyes widened when she saw me, Mom, what are you doing? She hissed, her voice low but panicked. I told you not to come. How am I supposed to explain this to everyone? I stared at her, heart pounding. Explain what exactly? That your mother, the woman who raised you, fed you, kept you alive, is such an embarrassment she can't even watch you get married? Her future mother-in-law was storming up the aisle now, heels clicking with fury. Get her out of here, she barked. She's ruining everything. I grabbed the microphone before anyone could stop me. The room went dead silent. In front of hundreds of guests, I said, in that video, you thanked your father for teaching you forgiveness and me for teaching you love. Tell me, Emily, when you told me not to come today, was that love? When you locked me inside my own house, was that love? People gasped. Emily looked like she wanted to disappear. She stepped forward, whispering urgently, Mom, please, stop it. This is not the time. Not the time? I snapped. Is there ever a good time to be publicly erased by your own child? Daniel, her fiancé, tried to de-escalate, walking toward me with his hands raised. Margaret, I think we're all just a little emotional right now. Maybe we can talk about this calmly. I turned to him. You want calm? Fine. Let's calmly talk about how your fiancé teamed up with her father, my ex-husband, to steal the wedding gifts I prepared, and then pretended I never existed. Calm enough for you? His face dropped. Then his mother chimed in, her voice like acid. Well, excuse me, but is it really that surprising? A woman who raises daughters alone and then gets divorced? Of course she brings bad luck. That was it. Before I knew it, my hand flew across her face with a loud crack. The room erupted. Emily screamed my name. Guests stood up. People pulled out phones. I didn't care. I was done hiding, done staying quiet for appearances. I'm not the curse here, I shouted. I'm not the reason this family is falling apart. You want someone to blame? Look in the mirror. All of you. Emily looked like she was about to cry, but I didn't stop. You talk about generosity, Emily. You say I should be like your father? Let me tell you something. He was ready to sell you and your sister to pay off his debts. I was the one who saved you. I raised you. And this is how you repay me? She reached for me, maybe to stop me, maybe to beg. But I backed away. No more, I said. From this day forward, I don't have a daughter named Emily. And with that I dropped the microphone and walked out, leaving the whole wedding in chaos behind me. The day after the wedding disaster, I thought I'd finally get a moment to breathe. I was wrong. Emily showed up at my doorstep unannounced. Her makeup was smudged, her eyes puffy. She didn't even wait for me to invite her in. She barged past me like she still had the right. Are you happy now? She snapped. You ruined everything. You embarrassed me in front of Daniel's family, in front of everyone. I crossed my arms. Funny, I thought you were doing a pretty good job of that yourself. She scoffed. All you had to do was stay home. But no, you had to make it about you. You had to destroy the one good thing in my life. I let her rant. I wanted to see how far she'd go. And then she said it. If you had just given us the house like you promised, none of this would have happened. Daniel's family thinks we're unstable now. They're already threatening to cancel the wedding entirely. Ah, there it was. The truth. Not grief, not guilt, just damage control. I raised an eyebrow. So this is really about the house? She looked me dead in the eye. You knew how important that place was, and you took it away because of your ego. And then, casually, too casually, she added, at least Dad understands. He said this is just who you've always been, controlling, cold. I froze. You've been talking to him? She didn't flinch. Yes, for months now. He reached out last year. We've been rebuilding things. If you hadn't forced the divorce, maybe I would have grown up with a real family. That hit harder than any slap I'd ever delivered. I stepped closer. You're telling me? The man who abandoned you, who never sent a dime, who almost sold you and your sister to pay off a loan shark. You've been rebuilding things with him? She looked away but didn't deny it. I grabbed her by the wrist and pulled her toward the bathroom. Before she could protest, I turned on the cold tap, cupped water in my hands, and splashed it straight into her face. She gasped, stumbled back. What the hell? I stared at her, soaked and stunned. You said you learned forgiveness from your father. Great. Then this shouldn't bother you, and while we're being generous, you won't mind that I took back your wedding gifts either, right? Her lips trembled. Mom, don't. Please, I didn't mean. I cut her off with a single, sharp slap. Did your father also teach you what betrayal feels like? Because if not, let this be your first lesson." She burst into tears, collapsed to her knees, clutching my arm. "I'm sorry, Mom, I was wrong. Please, don't give up on me. I need you." I pulled away. Not my problem anymore. And then I walked out of the room, leaving her crying on the floor. I didn't lock the door. But I didn't open it for her either. A few days after I shut the door in Emily's face, I paid a visit to the house I had once intended to gift her. Not anymore. The deed was still under my name. I never signed it over, and thank God for that. What she and her father tried to pull, I wasn't about to let it stand. But as I stepped onto the front porch, I realized something was off. The door was slightly open, voices inside. I walked in and froze. Sitting comfortably on the living room couch, sipping tea like he owned the place, was my ex-husband. The man who hadn't lifted a finger to raise his daughters. And there was Emily, chatting with him like they were some perfect father-daughter duo. "Once we're fully moved in," she was saying, "we can turn the second bedroom into your office. I told Daniel you'd be living with us. He's fine with it." I stepped forward. "Living with you?" They both jumped. My ex stood up, all charm and fake concern. "Margaret, didn't expect you." Emily paled. "Mom, I can explain." I cut her off. "No need, I've heard enough." I pulled out the deed from my bag, slapped it on the table. "This house is mine. The movers will be here in 2 hours. Get your things and get out." Her father scoffed. "Come on, don't be petty. You were going to give it to her anyway." I turned to him, cold as ice. "And you were going to give our daughters a childhood, remember? How did that turn out?" He opened his mouth but had nothing to say. Emily stepped in. "You said you wanted to support me. Why are you taking it all back now?" I stared at her, because I finally saw what this really was, a setup. Then Daniel and his mother walked in, uninvited but clearly informed. His mother crossed her arms. "You're being cruel. You promised this to Emily." I pulled out the title document. "Show me where I signed. Until then, I'm reclaiming what's mine." Daniel tried to mediate. "Margaret, we can share the space. Maybe even let you stay in the guest room if..." I laughed out loud. "You want me to live in my house as your guest?" Emily looked like she wanted to cry. Then I noticed something on the kitchen counter, an open envelope, a receipt. My eyes scanned it, a transfer of $16,000, from Daniel's mother to Emily. I picked it up. "Interesting. You received a wedding contribution. Where did that money go?" Emily's eyes darted to her father. Silence. "Don't tell me," I said slowly. "You gave it to him?" More silence. I turned to Daniel's mother. "She told you she'd use the money for the wedding, right?" The woman looked confused. "Yes, I gave it directly to Emily. She said she'd coordinate things with you." My ex raised his hands, trying to play innocent. "She offered, okay? It wasn't like I forced her, just needed help with some bad investments." I snapped. "So you used your daughter to launder money from her fiancé's family?" Emily broke down. "I didn't know he'd blow it all. He said he'd invest it, that it would grow." Daniel was staring at her like she was a stranger. "You lied to me. You gave away our wedding fund without even telling me." And that's when the shouting started. Daniel's mother accused Emily of fraud. Emily accused her father of manipulation. He called me a snake for ruining his plan. I just stood there, watching the whole house of cards collapse. In the end, I didn't even need to kick them out. They scattered on their own. After I walked out of that house, the house I reclaimed with every legal right and moral reason, I thought they might finally understand that I was done. But when people have fed off your generosity for too long, they don't just let go. They claw. The next morning, I heard shouting outside my building. Emily, Daniel, and Mrs. Thompson were standing at the gate to my complex, arguing loud enough to wake the whole neighborhood. They weren't even pretending to be civil anymore. "You tricked us," Mrs. Thompson screamed. "You promised her the house." "This is your fault," Emily shouted back. "You told me Mom would never go through with it." Even Daniel chimed in, exhausted and ashamed. "Can we stop yelling and just figure out how we're going to fix this?" I walked out onto the front steps with my coffee in one hand and a folder of legal papers in the other. "Still trying to split the spoils, huh?" I said calmly. "Here's an idea. Fix your own mess." Emily marched up to me, eyes red. "Mom, please, I know I messed up, but Daniel's family is threatening to call off everything. We don't have a place to stay. We don't have anything." I sipped my coffee. And that's my problem because. Then she said it, the final nail in the coffin. Because you're my mother. For a moment there was silence. Even Mrs. Thompson stopped ranting. I looked at Emily, really looked at her. The same girl I once rocked to sleep, who used to hold my hand crossing the street. The same girl who locked me in my own house to stop me from attending her wedding. Who gave my money to the father who abandoned her. Who watched strangers insult me and said nothing. I took a deep breath and said, "No, I was your mother, but you buried that version of me a long time ago." Daniel turned to Emily, confused. "Wait, what does she mean? You locked her in the house?" The blood drained from her face. Mrs. Thompson looked horrified. "You what?" And just like that, the last cracks in their facade gave way. Accusations started flying. Daniel demanded answers. His mother blamed Emily. Emily blamed me. No one could agree on who ruined what. But to me the answer was obvious. They all did it to themselves. The argument escalated until Mrs. Thompson shoved Emily. Emily shoved back. Daniel tried to step between, but someone slipped. A stumble, a scream. Daniel hit the ground, head cracking against the pavement. Time froze. Blood. Panic. Emily shrieked. Mrs. Thompson collapsed. Neighbors called 911. As paramedics rushed him into the ambulance, the doctor's words rang clear. Head trauma, possible coma. No promises, no guarantees. At the hospital, they looked at me like I owed them something. Like I was the one who could fix it. I stood up, slung my bag over my shoulder, and looked Emily in the eyes one last time. "You chose your side. Now live with it." Then I turned and walked away. For good this time.